Hey, thanks for stopping by our website, our media pages today, whether it's on Facebook, our YouTube channel, or the other various media outlets that we have. It's great to have you a part of what we're doing. And the teaching I want to bring to you today is entitled Life After the Death of God. That sounds like a strange statement, and really it would be a contradiction, but it's about a philosophy expounded years ago through the writings of a German philosopher by the name of Nietzsche. What will society be like if God is removed from the conversation? What will the outcome, the moral consequence be if God is removed from the conversation? I'll be honest with you, this is not the best presentation I've ever done. It's not the best speaking that I've ever done, but I still want to bring it to you because of the contents. It's not so much a matter of how it's said, but rather what is said. And I think that what we bring to you is so important and so significant, I went on ahead and decided to post it on our media sites. So take a listen, and I hope you get something out of it that will be beneficial. In turn, helping you understand the big questions of life and helping you to understand the God that created you and the Jesus Christ who came from heaven to die for you a little bit better.
It's extremely beneficial to understand contrary worldviews, contrary viewpoints to the Christian worldview. The statistics are alarming. When you boil it down to a real Christian worldview that is lived out by the Christian church in this country, you've got about 3% of the nation that would actually be identified as Christians who live the biblical worldview ethic. 3% of our population, even though 60 to 70% of the population identifies as being Christian. Most people have no comprehension of what Christian even means, because Christianity has become about consumerism other than servanthood and Christ's lordship. And so I think it's beneficial to understand how believers arrive at their conclusions. How does the atheist, how does the naturalist arrive at their belief system? I think one of the reasons that Christians do not engage the atheist worldview is because we ourselves are ill-prepared. And we are unqualified because we are ill-prepared, and we don't want to be made to look like a fool because we can't answer the tough questions that the unbeliever has. But I want to know how the atheist arrived at their conclusion. I want to know what influences, what people, what teachers, what processes, what life experiences did someone go through that brought them to the place of atheism. Let's not be like this naive church world out there that says people don't believe in God simply because they are rebels and they want their own way. It's a lot more complex than that. It's much deeper than that. I contend it once again, never should the atheist's viewpoint be arbitrarily dismissed. Never should we say they're just being religiously hostile. I think we need to ask questions to each person that denies the existence of God. And the reason that I say that is because listen to me here. This is anger speaking now. I personally wonder if it's really possible to believe that God does not exist apart from conditioning. Is it possible to believe that God really does not exist apart from conditioning? Whether that conditioning be educational, whether it be experiential, whether that conditioning comes from an influential person in somebody's life. I guess what I'm saying is this. I kind of think that all people are born with this intrinsic belief that there is a God. Call it a gut feeling, there is a God. I think this morning of George Bernard Shaw. If you don't mind, please give me slide number 2. He was a famous Irish playwright. And he makes this, I think, this dichotomous statement. And I like what he says. I thank God that I am an atheist. I am an atheist. And I thank God for it. Being a playwright in 1932, he published a book called Too Good to Be True. And in the book Too Good to Be True, one of the characters, a guy by the name of Elder, in act number 3 makes this statement. He says, "Witness the great tragedy of an atheist who has lost his faith." George Bernard Shaw, I'm an atheist and I thank God for it. And now in act number 3 of his work, Too Good to Be True, he writes the words, "Witness the great tragedy of an atheist who has lost his faith." So I wonder, what was George Bernard Shaw really saying here? Was this merely a work of fictional suspense, or was Shaw perhaps using a literary technique called authorship, surrogate authorship? That is to say, the character that he's writing about is actually expressing how he feels. I am an atheist, and I thank God for it. Witness the great tragedy of an atheist who has lost his faith. What is life like after the death of God? I think one thing that we can determine this morning is this: it is undeniable. An undeniable fact is the outcome of this world with a non-existent God has enormous implications. The implications of a world with God have their own set of outcomes, but what about a world that has no God? What are the ramifications? What are the implications of that? A world without God to the theist is totally and completely devastating. A theist is somebody that believes in God. The concept of there not being a God to the atheist and the non-theist is absolutely liberating. And something I want to share with you, because this is becoming more and more commonplace. There are more people out there today now identifying themselves as non-theists as opposed to atheists. And the reason they're doing that is this: if somebody says, "I am an atheist," they have just made a proposition they need to substantiate. In other words, if somebody says, "I'm an atheist," you have a right to say to them, "How did you arrive at that conclusion?" Because it's a statement of fact. There is no God. So instead of saying there is no God, people say, "I'm a non-theist. I just don't think there's a God, but I can't necessarily argue the point." Because just as Christians are hard-pressed to defend their theistic worldview, atheists are also hard-pressed to defend their atheism. Are we all on the same page? Nobody understood that any better than Friedrich Nietzsche. You've heard me just allude to this guy time and this guy was brilliant. I mean, this guy is one of the greatest German philosophers, not only of modern times, but I think he was one of the greatest philosophers of all time, even though he was decisively atheistic. He was an intellectual on par with few. I mean, his intelligence was absolutely incredible, and yet he was a rabid atheist, despite the fact that he came from a decidedly Christian background. Both his father and his grandfather were Lutheran pastors. And yet, despite the fact he was raised in a Christian heritage, he absolutely rejected the notion of a theistic worldview or the existence of God. So he publishes a work in 1844. That does not make sense, because he was born in 1845. Never mind, he published a work. I'm looking at my notes saying that's not possible. He would have been one. I could have just said that and blown right on past it and nobody would have caught it. But this is what he writes, and you've heard me quote this before. It's one of the most famous sayings in contemporary times. God is dead. Time magazine adopted that slogan and put it on the front of one of their periodicals several years ago. He said, God is dead. Now, this is important to understand because it is this thinking that has invaded the educational system of the United States, because what was being taught in Europe is now being taught here at home. He said, God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. Yet, his shadow still looms. How shall we comfort ourselves? Notice what he says, the murderers, plural, of all murderers. What was the holiest and the mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. We have killed God, he said. Who will wipe this blood from off of us? What water is there for us to cleanse ourselves? Now, I don't know how you feel when you read this particular statement, but in my mind, I am seeing a man in total conflict. God is dead, and the God worldview or the Christian ethic is bunk, and yet by discarding the Christian worldview, we are now murderers of all murderers, and there's nothing out there that we can do or use to assuage us of the guilt that we feel and the mess that we've created.
Doing the work of ministry is never easy. And quite honestly, it requires partnerships. It requires financial backing. God is opening doors for us to move into high school classroom settings, college campuses, and also into churches that are filled with parishioners who have questions that have never been answered despite the fact they've been in church for almost all of their lives. We're seeking answers to the tough questions of life. But doing that requires financial partnership. I cannot do this alone, as would be overly obvious. I need help. Help for our outreach, giving information to booklets, books, different kinds of help, CDs, DVDs, to those who have these deep questions. I want to be able to provide the questioner resources without asking for money in return. I think you understand what I'm trying to say, where I'm coming from. It also costs a great deal of money to do social media correctly, and so I need your help. If you go to our website, billyanger.com, you will notice on the home page there is an icon for making a donation. If you click on that icon, it will take you directly into our donation page. And on that donation page, which is self-explanatory, you will have the option to give a one-time gift or a reoccurring gift. For those of you that can only give a one-time gift, thank you so much. You have no idea how grateful I am for that help. But for those of you that say, Billy, I believe in what you're doing and I want to partner with you, can I ask you to consider today giving a reoccurring monthly gift, bi-weekly gift? For some of you it means maybe even a weekly gift. That allows me to know how much money we'll have coming in on a consistent basis. That allows us to put a budget together where we know how much we can spend in reaching the audience that we're trying to reach. Would you consider partnering with me today? We'll do a lot of great things together for the kingdom of God, in the process answering questions that people have that have gone unanswered for far too long. Thank you.
Because when you take God out of the conversation, you now have a mess on your hands. What did Nietzsche mean when he said God is dead? He wasn't talking about committing homicide. He wasn't talking about killing God with a gun, a knife, or some other means. He did not believe there was a God. Are we all on the same page? He doesn't even believe that there is a God. He's an atheist. What he is saying is this. Remember, he is in Europe during the Age of Enlightenment. And the Age of Enlightenment taught that both science and morality would be the forefront of all human thinking from that point forward. In other words, we no longer need the superstitions of the Bible. We no longer need the fiction and the fables of the Holy Bible. Mankind, through his education, through his science, and through his own morality, can establish a utopian paradise. We don't need God. That's what the statement, God is dead, actually means. So let's explore that. Nietzsche believed that the idea of God was a human construct. In other words, people invented the idea of God so that they could handle widespread suffering. He said it began with the Jewish people, and it's been traced down through history time and time again. People try to find an explanation for why it is they're struggling and why they're being persecuted, so they invent this fable called God. Because if there is a God, maybe then we can understand why it is we're facing these hardships. You see, in the mind of Nietzsche, if you don't mind, please, give me slide number 6. The idea of God was about consoling people that had experienced things of loss. In the mind of Nietzsche, he said that God was necessary for people because people sought justice during times of lawlessness. And number 3, he said God was necessary because people want peace at the time of death. And when a loved one passes, they want to know that their loved one is somewhere in the afterlife, and it gives them the opportunity of optimism. Maybe I'll see that loved one again. And again, in the mind of Nietzsche, it was a human construct. It had no basis in fact. In other words, he was saying the belief in God is nothing but a psychological fabrication to soothe us in our times of distress, to ease us in our moments of trauma, and provide us companionship in our times of grief. But now he's saying man doesn't need God. And again, you might be saying, Pastor, this is just good. That's nice. You're giving me a history lesson of what happened over in Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, 80%, this is what they taught us, 80% of all high school graduates are now leaning toward an atheist worldview. 8 out of 10. Because what started in Europe invariably comes to America. And you may say, again, this doesn't really interest me much, but if you've got kids and grandkids, it ought to scare something out of you. That's why I was approached about starting some chapters, apologetic teaching chapters in local high schools right here in Dallas-Fort Worth. I mean, what's that even about? Not Bible studies, but apologetic chapters where people who have questions about faith, high schoolers who have questions about the existence of God, can meet on a weekly basis and have their questions answered. Do you not understand the miraculous implications of that? When we drove God out of the classrooms, thanks to Madalyn Murray O'Hair back in the 1960s, we've seen what the end product is when you kill God. When you kill God, how will you wipe the blood from your knives of homicide, moral homicide, spiritual homicide? Nietzsche said that God was used for morality, but you no longer need God to understand morality or human value. Science and philosophy are now capable of providing such meaning. I'm going to teach something. I'm going to teach something coming up here in the next few weeks, and I'll know if you get bored by these or not, because I'll announce it ahead of time. And if you're here, I'll know you're not, and if you're not here, I'll know you are. But it's going to be a teaching on Jesus and science. Trust the science. All right? If there's one thing we've heard down through the past 30 years, it is Christianity and science are at odds with one another. Nothing could be further from the truth, and I'm going to show you irrefutable evidence of how that most of the inroads made through the various disciplines of science were made by men who had a theistic worldview, people that believed in the existence of God. Because we have been told a bald-faced lie, and we sit back stupidly believing it because we have not educated ourselves to know we're being lied to. That was a good place to say something. Now here's the crazy thing. Now listen to me. Nietzsche said we don't need God. Now watch this. We don't need God, and yet he comes back and says, but when we get rid of God, we're in trouble. We are in trouble because even though there is no God, it's the teachings, the morals, the code of ethics found in the Bible that keep people from destroying one another. I'll have more to say about that momentarily. He wrote this in his book, Twilight of the Idols. Hold on. Don't go in. This I know he wrote in 1840. No, he didn't. He wrote this. Hold on. He didn't write it when he was one. Don't just give me a minute to get my brain back. 45 to 9. He wrote this in 1889. He was born in 1845. He died in 1900. This was his last writing. Among his last writings, I should say, in 1889. He said this, when one gives up, now listen to this, when one gives up the Christian faith, one pulls the right to Christian morality out from under one's feet. This morality is by no means self-evident. Christianity is a system. A whole view of things thought out together. By breaking one main concept out of it, the faith in God, one breaks the whole. I'll have more to say, just hang in there. So what happens when there's no God? Are you still with me? You know, there's a lot of things. You still with me out there? If you say yes, I promise I'll keep going. If you say no, I'll go past 12 o'clock. All right? What happens when there's no God? Number one, man must himself function as God. If there is no God, there are a variety of conclusions that must necessarily be true. Number one, if there is no God, man must function as God, because the absence of an infinite being only leaves a finite being. We are finite beings that are both limited and also relative in our thinking. That is to say, what I think is right, but that which Mark thinks is right, because it disagrees with what I think is right, he's now wrong. If there's no God, there's no infinite being, there's no other worldliness, there is no standard that exceeds the standard established by human principle. One of the things I was discussing yesterday is, where did morality come from? Because the atheist says that, this is another conversation, morality is not from God. Instead, it's the survival of the fittest. I'll have more to teach on that in the upcoming weeks, if you promise to come back. If you don't, I'll just go back to Bible expositions, or I'll just leave Russ and Mark at it. Well, give me Malcolm Muggeridge, please, if you don't mind. I love Muggeridge. I've mentioned him so many different times. I love this quote that he says, if God is dead, somebody needs to take his place. If God is dead, somebody needs to take his place. That's what Nietzsche was fearing. Because Nietzsche understood that if there's a vacuum, a moral and spiritual vacuum, something is going to step in and fill that slot of emptiness. And that place of emptiness is now being filled through something called humanism. How many can relate to, or you've heard the word humanism before? What is humanism? Humanism is simply this: man becomes the measure of all things, ethically, morally, spiritually, etc. Here's the problem: when man becomes the measure of all things, that being humanism, we've got to ask ourselves some very important questions. Number one, what man becomes the measure of all things? Who is it that establishes the criteria for someone's behavior? You see, that's exactly the problem that Eve had in the Garden of Eden. Eve was a humanist in the sense that she wanted to live in paradise without following the moral boundaries that God had established. Hey, man, don't fault Eve. We Americans are far worse. We want the benefits of the blessing, but we don't want to live in compliance to the moral law that ensures the blessing of God in our lives and upon our nation. Are you still with me out there? So the serpent comes and says, in the day that you eat of that forbidden tree, your eyes are going to be opened and you're going to be like God. I mean, that statement Satan has, directed toward Eve, it's loaded with all kinds of implication. He's saying this, number one, why are you going to be governed by someone other than yourself? Don't be governed by anybody. You be governed by yourself. But if you're going to govern your own life, that means you must establish your own ethical code. And now you've got yourself ethical chaos on hand. If you don't believe that to be true, just turn on the news. Give me slide number 10. The poem Invictus by William Henley. Let me read some of it to you. Out of the night that covers me, black from the pit, from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my uncontrollable soul. In the felt clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor have I cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloody, but yet remains unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade, and yet the menace of all those years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments are in the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. How many have heard that quote before? I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. In other words, becoming God becomes your identity, for there is no God beyond you. And now you are in charge of your own ethic. And if you are in charge of your own ethic, the entirety of your life becomes self-determining. What your life is about the decisions that you make, and don't look at anybody else in the process. Let me go back. Let me go back to Muggeridge. Are you still with me out there? I gave you the first words of Muggeridge. Give me the next slide. If God is dead, somebody, now watch this. If God is dead, somebody is going to need to take his place. Continue on. This is the quote continued. If God is dead, someone needs to take his place. It will be megalomania or erotomania. You say, what's megalomania? What's erotomania? He describes it right here. Megalomania is the drive for power. Erotomania, eroticism, is the drive for pleasure. He said it will either be the clenched fist or the phallus. It'll either be Hitler or Hefner. Either pleasure or power. Pleasure or power. I won't even tell you what a phallus is. You'll I'm sure you're looking up that on your phone right now, phallus symbol. It'll be either pleasure or power. But what Muggeridge is saying here is people will be governed. People will be governed, regardless of the illusion of individualism. I'm an individual. I'm the captain of my fate. I'm the master of my soul. And Muggeridge is saying, no, you're not. That is just an illusion. I mean, you will be governed by a political potentate. You will be governed by a Vladimir Putin that has an insatiable appetite for power. What that thug is doing over there right now in the Ukraine is unspeakable. And I love Zelensky. You know, Zelensky is a Jew. And he's out there with his military guard, the president of the Ukraine, population 41 million people, and he's out there with his army dressed in his military garb. Reminds me of another little Jew outnumbered by a fierce giant named Goliath that said, I'm not going to retreat in the face of battle, but I'm going to grab 5 smooth stones in my slingshot and face down the enemy that dares to threaten our country. I love what, Biden's saying, we'll evacuate you, and he comes back and he says, I don't need a ride. He says, I need ammunition. Thank God for Germany, sending in some anti-tank missiles and other kinds of armament. Now, are you still with me out there? The illusion is that you think you're the God of your destiny. You'll be governed by a political power, but in most instances, you'll be governed by your own drive for pleasure. You will be governed by your own drive for pleasure, and ultimately your drive for pleasure exceeds moral restraints. It exceeds any ethical boundaries that you have established. Sometimes we wonder if there is ever really an answer to those tough questions, and it seems like the questions are getting more and more intense as the months and years unfold. Hi, I'm Billy Anger. Each and every week I put out an email that answers some of the questions that I've been fielding. These are questions about philosophy, truth, the Bible, Christianity, the existence of God, and the list is almost limitless. If you'd like to receive our email each and every week, simply drop me a line, send me an email at billyanger@hotmail.com. We will put you on the list immediately and get that email back to you and hopefully answer some of your questions in the process. I look forward to hearing from you soon. And soon you find yourself making decisions about right and wrong without any point of reference. That's the problem with America. If you want it, go for it. And if it doesn't hurt anybody, have at it. The problem is that is a lie, because everything that you do has repercussions concerning the people that live around you, because we do not live autonomously. We live surrounded by a society of people. You still out there? Can I prove this? Yes. Here in America, 21st century America has lost its ability to distinguish between what is right and what is wrong. It's lost its ability to distinguish between what's appropriate and what's inappropriate. You may not agree with that. It doesn't matter. I'm right. You say we haven't lost. Yeah. All you've got to do is look at Hollywood. All you've got to do is look at Hollywood. And I don't want to go back to old-time clothesline preaching, but at the same time, I think we need some old-time holiness preaching back in the pulpit of this country. I'm speaking to myself here. I'm speaking to myself. I'll watch it later by the camera. I'm speaking to myself. Television bombards us with a plethora of seductions. And instead of watching these seductions and weeping over them, we find ourselves intrigued by them and curious. And instead of grieving over illegitimacies, we become fascinated by the potential. I'm preaching good right now. Vulgarity makes us laugh. Godly standards that are both implicitly and explicitly mocked, we no longer take offense. We embrace them, and we give our perfunctory approval as we laugh at humor that disregards and shakes its fist in the face of God. Yesterday I had the opportunity to meet a man that was in Hollywood. He was a writer. I don't know what all he did behind the scenes, but he rattled off this list of people that he knows well. Julia Roberts and Minnie Driver and Mariska Hargitay and all that stuff. Knows these people extremely well. Used to. And he was living in Hollywood the life of a gay man. And he said God came to him in an amazing way. I mean, a book of Acts, chapter 9, Apostle Paul, Damascus Road experience, where God just came to him, made his presence known, and this man was instantly and gloriously set free by the power of God, gave his life to Christ. Not that he doesn't wrestle with these kind of issues still. I loved his candor. I loved his honesty. He said, he said, people ask me all the time, do you still wrestle with these feelings toward other men? And his response is, do you still battle with temptation? Because that's just the world we live in. But he said, when I gave my life to Christ, he said, I had to leave Hollywood behind. And this is what he said, because everything, he said, I was on the sets of all these programs, and he said, everything that Hollywood is pumping out is, he said, it's anti-God. You have no idea behind the scenes how Hollywood hates the idea of God. Hates it. You see that in the productions that they put forth, but he said, you have no idea the animosity, the vitriol, the hatred of Hollywood toward anything God, and they despise Christianity. And yet we sit back, ha ha ha, hee hee hee, ha ha ha. Isn't that funny? I told you I'll share this with you, and you may again think I'm stupid for sharing this. I used to think I loved the Big Bang Theory. Y'all know what the Big Bang Theory is? I loved it so much that when the seasons went on sale for $9.99, I downloaded 4 seasons. 4 seasons. So I could watch those programs periodically when I'm on the airplane. $40 I invested in the Big Bang Theory until the Holy Spirit said, no. Wait a minute, this is lighthearted, this is fun. And here I am laughing at brazen fornication. I'm laughing at the main character mocking anything that is theistic in its worldview. I'm sitting there laughing at a program that is decidedly and decisively anti-theistic, anti-God, and think nothing of it. Until and I thank God that the Holy Spirit is better at his job than I am. I am glad that the Holy Spirit has the uncanny ability to gently nudge, to compassionately woo, to tenderly draw, and also kick us upside to get our attention. Y'all still out there with me? And he said, no more. No more, no more, no more. You can't be a vessel of honor unto me if you're laughing at the things I died on the cross to destroy. All right, point number 2. Point number 1, if there is no God, somebody needs to take his place. Point number 2, slide 12. There can be no absolute meaning of life when life itself is the product of randomness. And I'm not going to take a long time to explore this. Give me that picture of Calamus. Another one of these intellectuals. Nobel Prize winner. Oh, by the way, the Nobel Prize was established by a Christian. Life has no meaning if everything's random. Everything's a gigantic cosmic burp. I wanted to use another word for flatulence, but I'm not going to do that. It's just one great big cosmic burp. And here it is. Nothing working on nothing, by nothing, through nothing, with nothing, produces everything. Orderly, systematic, and intelligent. Animation comes from something that's not animated. Never mind, don't get me started on this. This is what the man says. You will never live if you're searching for the meaning of life. You'll never live if you're searching for the meaning of life. Can you give me a definition for meaning? Yeah. What something's meant to be. What something has been created. What is its intended purpose? What is its intention in word, in action, in concept? Because, listen to me, without understanding meaning, without understanding intention, you have no choice but to misuse what it is that you have. If you don't understand meaning, you're going to misunderstand. I was in Africa. I was in the bush of Africa. And if I held this up to one of the natives, they would have no idea what this was. It would have no meaning to them. And if it has no meaning, then they'll never identify its purpose. There's a difference between meaning and purpose. There's a great article written on that by Dr. Paul Wong on the internet. I would encourage you to read it. Difference between meaning and purpose. Let me give you another example, if you don't mind. Give me slide number 14. You look at one of these when you walk into the doctor's office, and you know what it means. Okay? But if you don't know what it means, then you misuse it because you don't understand its purpose. If you don't understand meaning, you'll never understand purpose. And when you misuse something that has been purposed for divine reasons, for your own human reasons, then you've got a mess on your hands. Just the perfect example. Slide number 40. If you don't know something's purpose, you don't know its meaning, and if you don't know what it means, you don't know what it's used for. Give me slide number 15. There it is. Slide 14, you understand the meaning. Slide number 15, you see the misuse of purpose. Are we all on the same page there? I'm going to rush through this because I know that you guys are anxious to go. Number 3, value becomes a matter of personal interest. Let me just give it to you this way. Slide number 16. Let me just run through this. Slide becomes a matter of personal interest. Slide number 16. What has greater value? A chocolate Easter bunny or a nitroglycerin tablet? Well, if you're in the middle of an MI, a myocardial infarct, I mean, you've got an occlusion and you're in a full-blown heart attack, I promise you that the chocolate Easter bunny won't do you any good. In fact, you've probably had too many chocolate Easter bunnies. At the same time, now watch this, at the same time, when the little child is rummaging through their Easter basket on Easter morning and they come across a vial of nitroglycerin tablets, those nitroglycerin tablets have no value to that child. And in point of fact, if the child takes the nitroglycerin tablet, they have misused that pill for its purpose or its meaning, and by misusing the pill that was meant to alleviate myocardial infarctions, that child himself can now imperil his own life. Am I making sense? Meaning and purpose, understanding purpose and understanding meaning so that your purpose is fulfilled in the meaning that God gave your life to be. But let me also throw this out. You know, if the child takes the nitroglycerin tablet, the child could die. But who really cares? Because after all, in the naturalist worldview or in the worldview of the atheist or the non-theist, that person has no value outside the physical realm. You don't believe that? The only value that your child has is the value you give your child. Your child doesn't have value that supersedes your opinion. And now you're at a variance. Because what happens to the child that's aborted? What happens to the child that is physically abused? Where does that child's value come from? Does it come from the people on this earth, or does it come from otherworldliness? That is to say, a morality given by a moral lawgiver. I get this all. I get this. I get this all the time. How do you know that? How can there be a God if evil exists? If evil exists, then that means good must exist. And if good exists and evil exists, and you say something's evil, there must be some kind of criteria by which you call something evil. You call something evil when it violates what? A law. If there's a law, somebody gave the law. That's just an easy argument to refute, but I won't go that path right now. You still out there with me? Number 4, the body replaces the soul. There we are in this country. Atheism denies the soul, which leaves the only option of materialism. And that is to say, reality is found in matter. Reality is found in substance. I promise I'm almost done. This is just stupid. Reality is found in substance. It's found in matter. I've got problems with that because understand, mathematics tells me my brain is real. Food, chocolate peanut butter pie and coconut cream pie and spaghetti with meatballs and fettuccine alfredo. Old Church of God blessing. Tells my stomach food is real. My stomach tells me food is real. My mind tells me math is real. What happens when my soul tells me God is real? And you tell me there is no God. That's why Psalm 19, give me slide number 19, please. Psalm 14 in verse 1, slide 19 says, the fool said in his heart, there's no God. What's he saying here? Why does the fool say there's no God? Because the fool is searching for satisfaction in the body when satisfaction can only come from the soul. Why are you a fool? Because you're trying to find fulfillment in things rather than purpose in God's meaning for your life. So let me give you part number 2 of Psalm 14. It says they are corrupt. What happens when you try to find purpose in matter? You may disagree with this all day long, but again, I'm right. What happens when you try to find purpose and meaning? Your life becomes one of excess. It becomes one of abuse. It becomes one of illegitimacy. In other words, you cross every line. I don't care how moral you are, you cross every moral line. And that's why Psalm 14 verse 1, part B says they're corrupt, they've committed detestable acts, and no one does good. All right, I'm almost done. I keep saying that. I'm like a real estate agent. I've got a lot of different closings. Remember I talked about Nietzsche at the beginning. 1888. He entitles a work, Ecce Homo, how one becomes what one is. Ecce Homo. It's taken from the Latin. It's what Pilate said to Christ, behold the man. And in that book, Ecce Homo, he's got several chapters. Why I'm a great author, why I'm so wise, why I'm so clever, why I write such good books. But the very last thing that Nietzsche writes is why I am my own destiny. And this is what, now watch this, this is what he writes. He says, this is what's going to happen if you get rid of God. If you kill God, this is what's going to happen. For when truth battles against the lies of millennia, there will be a shock wave, earthquakes, transportation of hills and valleys, such as the world has never imagined in all of its dreams. What is the lie of the millennia? The belief in God. When you battle against the belief in God, you've got chaos coming. The concept, politics, now watch this, then becomes entirely absorbed into the realm of spiritual warfare. He's saying that's just ridiculous. All the mighty worlds of the ancient order of society are blown into space. Now, stay with me here. For they all are based on lies. Get rid of God, this is what he's saying. When you get rid of God, there will be wars the likes of which we have never seen on this earth before. When you get rid of God, there will be wars on this earth the likes of which we've never seen before. 1900, Nietzsche died in 1900. I'll tell you how he died in just a moment. 1900 through 1999. How many wars have there been? Just throw out a rough number. Give me slide number 1. Give me slide number 2. Give me slide number 3. That's just the Israeli wars. Give me slide number 4. Give me slide number 5. Give me slide number 6. Give me slide number 7. Get rid of God. Kill God. And there will be wars the likes of which the world has never seen before. In the past 100 years, the prophecy of Nietzsche came to fulfillment as over 160 million people lost their lives. Get rid of God, and the end result is death. And here's the crazy thing. In Turin, Italy, in January of 1889, At the age of 44, Nietzsche collapsed. He never recovered. He lived the next 11 years of his life totally deranged, totally out of his mind. The only time he found lucidity, the only time he became lucid in his thinking, this is the irony. He wrote someone. He wrote one letter. You know who he wrote? He wrote a Christian friend of his. The atheist wrote a Christian when the atheist lost his mind at 44 years of age. He lived the rest of his life in an asylum. Because when you take God and purposefully throw him out, the end result is death. The end result is death. What shall be the end of those that obey not the gospel? That's all I've got to say today. Gabe, I hope that was all right. Appreciate that. Oh, man, Gabe. I love Gabe. I appreciate that. Life after the death of God. Why did I speak that this morning? Why did I teach that this morning? Because this country is becoming decisively atheist. It won't, now listen to me, it will acknowledge deity, but it will not acknowledge deity that's outlined in the Scriptures that demands behavior according to that prescription found in Scripture. So in other words, we're inventing our own God even in the Christian world. That's another message altogether. We have Paul talked about it, another Jesus, another gospel, another Christ. What are you doing up here? We're going to sing?
Whenever you're ready.
Oh man, give me the key of C again. I don't know where my notes are. My notes have disappeared. Wait a minute. There we go. I should have this memorized. Oh, I should. Oh, with numberless blessings, stand with me, please. Each moment he crowns and fills with his goodness divine. G. I sing for my rapture. Oh, glory to God for such a Redeemer as mine. He hideth my soul in the cleft of the rock that shadows a dry, thirsty land. He hideth my life in the depths of his love and covers me there with his hand. And he covers me there with his hand. If you need prayer this morning, I don't want us to leave without praying. I want you to come and join me up front. If the Holy Spirit has spoken something to your heart in the course of this teaching this morning, don't leave without coming for prayer.